Members. Members, committee reports will be deemed read. We will proceed to unfinished business, file item 82. Waiting for Senator Mark Leno. Members, if we can have members return back to the Senate floor to proceed with our work, please. Members, we will proceed to unfinished business, file item 82, Senate Bill 3 by Senator Mark Leno. Mr. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 3 by Senator Leno, an act linked to labor.
Senator Leno, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, it's my real pleasure and honor to share with you the amendments that we are going to be voting on concurrence as they have left the Assembly for SB 3. We have already debated SB 3 last year. This is a 2-year bill, so I will spare you my soapbox. But I will remind everybody that the reason SB 3 is before us is reflected in a comment made by President Obama, which is that income inequality is the defining challenge of our era. Over 60% of working people are living paycheck to paycheck, literally living paycheck to paycheck. The inflation-adjusted median wage for workers over the past 20 years have, for the bottom 40%, which include all minimum wage workers, has actually decreased by over 10%. So workers are struggling. 2.2 million Californians are currently earning minimum wage, and they are living in poverty because it is a sub-poverty wage. So that is why we are here. The differences between what we voted on last year and this year are as follows. In many respects, this is actually a more modest proposal than what the Senate has already passed, and I'll describe why I say that. In the original SB 3, we would have gotten to $13 an hour as a minimum wage for California by 2017. In this proposal, we won't get to $13 an hour until 2020, 3 years later. There are then 2 additional steps in this version to take us to $14 an hour in 2021 and another dollar increment in 2022. Another provision that this version has that the original one did not is that it gives small businesses an extra year to get to not only $13 an hour, but also to $15 an hour. It delays the entire program by 1 year. And then additionally, this amended version has what we're referring to as a pause button or an off-ramp, which authorizes the governor to meet one of 2 tests. One is economic, the other is budgetary, so that if there is a drop in sales tax receipts, if the economy is slowing significantly by certain definitions in the bill, that the governor is able to pause the next step up until we get to 15. The original bill had no such provisions. Keep in mind that this legislature, by the same simple majority vote that it can pass this bill today, can at any time in the future make adjustments to it or in fact repeal it. So we retain control always, though the bill specifically and proactively gave the governor authority to make decisions on his or her own should there be need in unknown fiscal times. So those are the differences between the 2 bills. One last and important difference is that when Assemblywoman Gonzalez successfully put into law 3 sick paid leave days for workers in California, unfortunately, in-home support service workers were carved out of that. This restores those 3 days for them as well. Again, 1 day up by 2018, a second day by 2020, and the third day by 2022 when we're at full implementation of the $15 an hour minimum wage. Those are the differences between the two bills. I ask for your concurrence on Assembly amendments.
Thank you. Members, debate or discussion on this item. Senator Gaines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 3. Our job in this building should be to help people climb the economic ladder, not cut off the bottom rungs. That is exactly what will happen if we shove through an unprecedented cost increase on businesses. This policy will be a gain for those lucky enough to keep their minimum wage jobs, for sure. It'll be a disaster for those who lose them because they don't have the experience or skill to justify that wage. They will be unemployed. Their minimum wage will be zero. And I want us to think about this vast state and how different it is. Rural wages are not like urban wages. I have a successful business restaurant owner in my district named Bruce Dean, who founded Black Bear Diner. He makes a great point when he says that this one-size-fits-all solution does not recognize the huge cost of living differences in our state. Here's an example. In high-wage San Jose, $15 will be below the 50% of median wage. But in Redding, where Mr. Dean lives, $15 would be 68% of the median. That means in the poorer parts of my district, struggling businesses are going to be on the hook to give immediate raises to a far larger pool of employees. There's going to be a death sentence to many businesses in my district and the employees who depend on them. And in my district, the cost of living is so different. The MIT wage calculator predicts that in 2022, a so-called living wage in Modoc County, which is in the far northern reaches of my district, would be $10.98 an hour. In San Francisco, it would be $16.41 an hour. They don't have similar economies at all. This poorly conceived policy will raise employer costs on workers' comp, unemployment insurance, and taxes, and will help cement California's position as the worst place to do business. This increase would be a fake raising tide that would actually sink a lot of boats. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Senator Gaines. Senator Hertzberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Why do we need a minimum wage? Why not let employees' salaries float on the open market, just like we do, say, for this computer or for this pen? Why not, if an employer is so good, should that employer not pay an employee 17 cents an hour or $1 a day? Why do we not? Why does that offend us? Because I would submit that even the most aggressive open marketers, free marketers, would say that 17 cents an hour violates a basic moral premise. I think that there's a difference. And the difference is that in America, there is a basic sense that if you go to work, that if you play by the rules, that if you work hard, you got enough money to take care of your family. It's a basic underlying essence of what America is about. What differentiates us from so many other nation states around the world. And so what are those numbers? I look at the MIT calculator as well, which is a much more conservative calculator than the Center for California Budget Project. But if you look in my county just a few years ago, that wage, what does it cost to live? What are the basics? Not to go to private school or to have fancy stuff. What does it cost for food, for health care, for housing and utilities, transportation? It's basically $11.33 an hour. Not much difference than the $10.98 an hour that was referred to with respect to another part of the state. If you look as what was expressed in the amendments here, the amount of the wages go up in January 2018 to $11 an hour. Now, that doesn't include the subsidies for CalFresh, the SNAP program, Covered California, EITC, housing subsidies, and the other kinds of things that taxpayers have to pay because we as a society say there's a basic moral standard by which folks should live. That is the question. Now, what we've seen in times of election and every time when this minimum wage was created, we have seen rhetoric, example after example, of the story of the sky is falling. Well, what does the data show? What do the facts show when you step back without regard to party, without regard to points of view, just what do the numbers show? And when you look at the economists that have looked at this throughout the years, what does it show? Well, in 1938, we created in the United States, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it implemented a 25-cent an hour wage. At the time, the National Association of Manufacturers said that the Fair Labor Standards Act constitutes a step in the direction of communism, Bolshevism, fascism, and Nazism. There were no economic downturns in 1938 at the time. In 1950, no, at the time, as a consequence, by virtue of what the experts look at with respect to that wage. In 1950, the wage went from 40 cents to 75 cents. Unemployment declined from 6.5% in 1950 to a low of 3% in 1951. Again, March 1st, 1956. Wages went from 75 cents, the minimum wage, from 75 cents to $1. Again, the month that this measure was enacted, unemployment rates went from 4.2%, a year later, 3.7%. Example after example, the mid-'70s, we certainly had the energy crisis, and there were some other economic determinations. And in 1980, in the heat of campaigns, which always happens in the heat of campaigns, Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of this state, who did a lot of great things. I am not someone who will just simply throw someone out because they are of a different party. He is the gentleman who wrote a lot of the environmental laws and did a lot of other things in California that I think were important. But he said in Time magazine in the heat of that campaign, the minimum wage has caused more misery and unemployment than anything since the Great Depression. Yet wages went up from $3.10 to $3.35 an hour at the time, and there were no discernible impacts by virtue of looking at all the various reports. All I'm trying to tell you is let's just differentiate the rhetoric from the economic circumstances. Let's marry that with the underlying core values of who we are and what differentiates us, what makes America great by playing by the rules and being able to provide for your family. And I'm not going to take the time, but I took a lot of time personally and went through the various studies and looked at what economists talked of channels for adjustment in the event that you have these wage increase changes. They looked at reduction in hours worked, reduction in non-wage benefits, expenditures on job training, fewer young people, higher prices that are being charged. Well, I looked at the studies for fast food restaurants and what the impacts were and what they actually did in terms of improving efficiencies. The bottom line of it all is that if you look at productivity of the U.S. worker, they grew by 72.2% between 1973 and 2014. Americans are working harder. So if you just take the pure economic analysis and say, well, what value do you get? What's the value of this pen? What's the value of this computer? Well, the value of the working folks that are producing for America has been increasing dramatically. I'm not going to go to the numbers to which were referred earlier as to what their compensation has been, but the bottom line is that their productivity has increased. And so the notion that this argument about the minimum wage, will there be impacts? Of course. Is this a perfect bill? No. Are there weaknesses and challenges? Yes. Do the restaurateurs make some points with respect to the front of the house and the back of the house? Absolutely. Are there issues with respect to social services and child care and issues that need to be taken care of with respect to this measure? Absolutely. Is there a safety valve that, in my judgment, that's a good safety valve, gives a little bit too much power to the executive branch and the Department of Finance? Absolutely. But the bottom line is this. What if we did nothing? What if we did nothing? What is the cost of providing services to folks? What is the impact of giving more money to people and making this transition? The truth of the matter is that we have been here before, that we have heard the same arguments before, time and time again. That the reality is that this is a tension that dominates these legislative bodies at the national level and across all jurisdictions. And it is always the fight. It is always the fight. But at the end of the day, it is about that moral component. It is about what is this country about. It is that when you are students of history and look at what the history of the human political order has been, it has been, and the greatness of this country is creating a middle class. Folks that make a couple bucks an hour aren't investing in tax straddles in the Bahamas. They're buying an extra pair of shoes for their kids. They're maybe putting a couple bucks away to be able to pay for school or to fix their house or whatever the case may be. It is the cornerstone and backbone of America. It is the most, there's no offshoring of this money. There's no money in some offshore account that we have to repatriate somewhere. This is the stuff that you make America about. You know, they're buying all the products. They're doing the stuff. It doesn't work. Otherwise, you get monopoly where somebody wins the game and the game's over and everybody goes bankrupt. It doesn't work that way. So yes, is there a tension? Yes. Yes, is it difficult at times? Yes. But the truth of the matter is this has been a struggle that we have always dealt with. And the failure to deal with it in any constructive way, are we going to have to make changes and corrections down the line? Always. That's what we're here for as a legislative branch of government. But I just share with everybody, because I hear these discussions, I hear the fear, I hear the noise, but the truth and the facts don't bear out. It is challenging. It is that point of tension. But I would suggest that we are not talking about a minimum wage. We are talking about a family wage. We talk about values here on both sides of the aisle of what we believe in. If you can't, at the core, make a living and look at your spouse in your eye or your kids and come home and do work and not have to take subsistence because you don't want to do it, because you want to do it the right way, and you can't do it, aren't we contradictory? Aren't we creating that level of a problem? So if there is some level of attention, so be it. That's the nature of the capitalist system. I would just say that at the end of the day, although not perfect, this is the right thing to do. It stands for the right moral principles and does it the right way. I ask for concurrence in this measure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Senator Nielsen.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, these are times when the Senate is at its best. Issues of great moment wherein we feel very strongly and passionately about it. Very different reasons. I rise in opposition to this measure. And I speak to the impacts that are real and not imagined. It sounds wonderful, $15 an hour, and all will prosper and be better off. I will argue that this is a Pyrrhic and elusive promise. The individual who will now have this $15 and may be better off, but for a short period of time, because that job may quickly and likely in many cases be eliminated, no longer there. That's the elusive and Pyrrhic promise. The impact will be immediate. Upon the signing of this legislation, within weeks, individuals, and I call it the hollow eyes, and I can envision in my mind's eyes those hollow eyes of the men and women and the youth who show up at work and are told their services are no longer needed. The elderly or retired person whose retirement is not quite adequate to keep them going. They've sought other work. Say a greeter at a big box store, where that job is what gives them the edge to keep going. Well, they're not going to be greeters anymore. Sorry, your services are no longer required. And to that point, we in America have become kind of, I'd argue a little bit lazy. We're used to convenience and service and not doing it ourselves. Look to that for each of us to diminish, because those who have provided those services will no longer be there. They won't be required because of $15 an hour. I think we should take that in mind. There's a student work program at Sacramento State, work experience program. It's not unique. Those kind of things are everywhere and have been a long time. Those students are not going to have those jobs. And many of those students depend on those jobs to continue their school. I think of the impacts, and I had folks from one of the counties I represent in my office yesterday, from the county and the schools, talking about this. Now, why would they be worried? Because in the county, they have individuals who are doing very important work in these jobs that receive the minimum wage. They're unequivocal. Those jobs are going to be gone. In the classrooms, those aides who help our students, and most assuredly who help our teachers, are not going to be there. That's going to have an impact on education. And we think about the help that this will provide to those individuals who get that $15 elusive and empiric opportunity. Maybe they're going to be better off for a while. But what about those hollow-eyed who go back home that night and wonder what are they going to do tomorrow? Another issue that I talked about with these folks in the office yesterday, compaction. There's just not an impact on this, if you will, lower level, entry level, minimum wage. What about anybody who's on the way up, who are trying to rise to higher levels? Well, they're not going to be real happy. There's a compaction. They're going to demand more too. That will indeed have its impact. And if you want to embrace mechanization, technology, well, I guess this will be a great stimulus, because that's what will happen. No question about it. We're going to become then a more mechanized culture. You'll go to the hamburger store and you won't have a young person or an elderly person to wait on you and take your order. You'll push some buttons and you'll open some box up and there will be your hamburger. Yeah, you'll just drive in and talk to that machine, and actually it'll be a recording and not even a human voice. And out will come a hamburger. There won't be any person there. You surely won't have a greeter at the big box store. And what about childcare? That's a great thing, isn't it? Well, that's sure going to be more costly. I think that should be of concern to us. I've often said that the greatest poverty program is a job. We did welfare reform here a long time ago when something called the GAIN program, and later became CalWorks, a program that over the decades has worked. I get testimony all the time from people who talk about their experiences with that, and it warms my heart every time to have had my small part of that over the years. And what was different about that is what we were changing welfare from if you need, you will receive, to if you need, we will develop your employability, your ability to be in the market, to have your skills, to have your education and knowledge. That means then you are available for work. You can be hired. But that's the fundamental element we're dealing with here, can be hired. The employer has a right to make a decision, and they will make those decisions on an economic basis. I often speak about the awesome power that the legislature and the administrative branch of government and the executive branches now have, that the legislature over decades have abdicated to the administrative branch and the executive branch. Here we go again. Great thing to give the director of finance this awesome power to make a determination. That concerns me greatly. And, in fact, the power to give the governor the authority and the power. Now, it is the power to suspend. I get that. But I wonder a little bit about this, what it means. Because it says the director will make the determination. And there will be an adjustment. Now, this is simply a rhetorical point, but I think it's valid and even amusing. There can be adjustment up, but if it's negative, it cannot be an adjustment down. Now, there could be, I would argue, an adjustment down that's justified. That's just a rhetorical point. That's not going to happen. But it gives the governor this authority to suspend. And it says, the governor may temporarily suspend a wage increase pursuant to this no more than 2 years. I really don't know exactly what that means. He make the final determination to temporarily suspend. But the governor cannot make that determination for no more than 2 years. Does that mean in 8 years? Or 4 years? What does that mean? The ability to suspend. That is not defined. I think that is a problem in the bill. And again, it gives the governor a pretty significant power. Maybe you would argue it's justified because that's a little bit of a control. And I respect that this governor has tried to be fiscally responsible, and this would be arguably a fiscally responsible step. But then maybe it should have been insisted that it could be adjusted down too, if that be the case, like a few years ago when we were $45 billion in the red. This will impact the state of California greatly as well. We have a lot of people that work in these kinds of jobs also. It will affect, indeed, what state pays for the things that we buy. I think we should be mindful of those impacts. The $15 an hour now, as it would be, I hate to use the term index because I think this bill actually goes beyond indexing, ensures that California will always be above America. And everybody is always going to be looking then at California. And right now, I gather that some other states are saying, go for it, state of California. They're wringing their hands and saying, oh boy. And they're just waiting to grab more business from this state. As you contemplate your vote, and I know each of you are doing it in your hearts and as seriously as you can, do think about the immediate impact in the very close weeks to come of that individual in the areas we represent. And particularly think about not just the coastal counties and the southern inland counties. They're much better off than the counties that most of us represent. Up and down the central and northern valley and out into the desert, Republicans and Democrats. I see in my mind's eye, and very personally, and I will even indeed this very night, some of those people in the stores in the home county, like in Red Bluff and Corning. And I'm going to see them coming and going. And in a few weeks, I'm going to know that some of them are not going to be there. Or some of them are not going to have jobs. And they won't be coming in to those stores quite as often. Those people are in my mind and in my hearts. And in the long run, I think about the impact on the economy of the state of California. We should too. Ladies and gentlemen, I respectfully urge a no vote.
Thank you. Senator Monning.
Thank you, Mr. President.